Something happened in NASCAR recently that genuinely made a lot of people stop and take another look at a story they thought they already had figured out. If you have been following the sport over the past several months, you already know there has been a serious amount of debate surrounding one particular situation. People have been going back and forth, fans have been arguing in the comments, veterans inside the garage have been speaking up, and every time a new development came along, it seemed to pour more fuel onto an already burning fire. For a while, it felt like the narrative was completely locked in and nothing was going to change it. But then one moment happened, not a win, not a dramatic finish, not even a race result at all, and suddenly the entire conversation shifted just enough that people started looking at things a little differently. Veterans noticed it, fans noticed it, and now the question that everyone thought was already answered is suddenly open again in a way that makes the next few weeks genuinely interesting. This is one of those situations that might not look massive on the surface when you first hear about it, but the more you think about the context, the more you realize it could end up meaning a great deal more than a simple highlight clip would suggest. So stay with this one, because there is a lot worth unpacking here. Before we get into the details, if you are a true NASCAR fan who follows this sport every week and loves honest conversation without any sugarcoating, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to NASCAR Nation Report right now. This channel is just getting off the ground, and the goal is to reach 10,000 subscribers by building a real community of genuine NASCAR fans who actually care about what happens in this sport every single week. It really does make a difference having real fans along for the ride. So if that sounds like you, welcome, and let us get into what is actually going on here. The driver at the center of this story is Cleetus McFarland. If that name is already familiar to you, then you know this is a story that has been dividing opinions since the moment it started. For those who need a quick background, Cleetus McFarland is a YouTuber who built a massive audience through car content, and at some point he made the decision to take a serious run at actual stock car racing competition. He entered the ARCA Maynard Series and then stepped up to the NASCAR Truck Series, and from the very beginning, his presence in professional NASCAR competition has been one of the most talked about and debated storylines in the entire garage. The transition from being a popular content creator to being a legitimate racing competitor is not something that happens smoothly for anyone, and Cleetus's path has been no exception. There were crashes during testing that raised eyebrows. There was an incident during his Truck Series debut at Daytona that put him directly in the crosshairs of some of the most respected names in the sport. Denny Hamlin came out publicly and questioned whether Cleetus actually had proper control of the race car. Brad Keselowski went further and criticized the process that allowed someone with his background to be approved to race at that level. Kyle Busch pointed plainly at the experience gap, making the argument that the jump from YouTube car content to professional NASCAR competition leaves enormous holes in the development of a driver. When names like Hamlin, Keselowski, and Busch all raise the same concern publicly, that is not something you can brush aside. Those are experienced, credible voices who have spent their entire careers inside this sport, and when they speak up about safety and readiness, people listen. So even after Cleetus signed a limited schedule deal with Richard Childress Racing, one of the most established teams in all of NASCAR, the questions did not go away. The deal gave him more structure, more resources, and more credibility by association, but the core question that had been circling him since the beginning stayed exactly the same. Is he actually ready for this? Does he genuinely belong at this level of competition, or is this a story that is going to end badly? That is the backdrop you need to keep in mind when you think about what happened next, because without that context, what occurred at Rockingham Speedway looks like a fairly ordinary moment. With that context, it looks like something else entirely. The moment happened during a test session at Rockingham Speedway as part of his preparation work with Richard Childress Racing, and this was not a light, casual day on track. Cleetus was behind the wheel for close to 10 straight hours. 10 hours! That is an enormous amount of time in a race car, and anyone who understands what that kind of session demands physically and mentally knows that by the time you get deep into a run like that, your body is tired, your concentration is being tested, and the margin for error gets smaller with every lap. Long run testing on worn tires is exactly the kind of environment that exposes weaknesses in a driver's skill set because the car is not giving you the grip and feedback you get on fresh rubber. You are managing a vehicle that is pushing and sliding and asking you to make constant small adjustments just to keep it on the racing surface. Late into one of those long runs with the tires well past their prime and grip levels way down from where they started, the car snapped loose in the middle of a corner. That moment right there is where the story either goes one of two ways. For an inexperienced driver who is still feeling their way through the learning process, that kind of snap oversteer on worn tires is almost always where things go wrong. The instinct is to panic, to overcorrect, to make one sharp input that sends the car into a spin and puts it straight into the wall. That is the predictable outcome. That is what the critics were probably expecting to see happen sooner or later, given everything that had come before. But that is not what happened. Instead, Cleetus caught it. Quick hands, no panic, no overcorrection, just a clean and controlled response that kept the car off the wall and allowed him to carry on as if nothing had gone wrong. He held it together, continued the run, and kept going. In isolation, a clean save during testing is a nice moment, but not necessarily a headline. Drivers save cars all the time, that is part of racing. But the reason this particular save carries so much more weight than it normally would is everything surrounding it. The hours he had already put in that day, the condition of the tires, the track he was on, the criticism that had been piling up for months before this moment, the deal he had just signed with a serious NASCAR team. All of that combined turns what looked like a normal piece of car control into something that the people paying attention found genuinely meaningful. Because car control under stress on worn tires deep into a long and exhausting test day is one of the hardest things to fake. You cannot manufacture that kind of response. Either the instincts are developing or they are not, and in that moment, they showed up. What happened when the clip made its way online is just as interesting as the moment itself, because the reaction split almost immediately into two very clear camps. On one side, fans who had been watching this story develop pointed to the save as real, tangible evidence of progress. They made the comparison to earlier in this same journey, when a different moment at the same track ended much worse. The contrast was obvious, and they felt like it proved something had changed. On the other side, the skeptics were not moved. One clean save, they argued, does not wipe away a record that includes crashes, incidents, and a lack of the kind of experience that most drivers at this level have built up over years of working through the lower series. Both sides had a point, and the honest answer is probably somewhere in the middle. Inside the garage, the reaction seemed to match that same measured tone. There was no sudden flood of endorsements from the veterans who had previously been critical. There was no dramatic reversal of opinion from the drivers who had spoken up about safety and readiness. But there was something that felt like a pause, like people were willing to look again. Not fully convinced, not ready to say the questions are answered, but no longer completely dismissive either. That shift from outright skepticism to cautious openness is actually significant when you think about how locked in the narrative had been before this moment. In a sport where reputations and opinions are formed quickly and changed slowly, a pause is meaningful. The criticism from Hamlin, Keselowski, and Busch was fair when it was made, and it is still fair now. NASCAR is not a forgiving environment for drivers who are learning on the fly. The speeds are real, the consequences of mistakes are real, and the level of skill required to race competitively and safely at any level of the Cup ecosystem is genuinely high. The argument that someone needs to put in the appropriate developmental time before stepping into professional competition is not an unreasonable one. It's actually the argument that the sport has been built on for generations. You earn your way up through the ranks, you develop your craft over time, and you prove you are ready before you are handed an opportunity at a higher level. But at the same time, you cannot look at what happened at Rockingham and pretend it did not show anything. A driver who does not have the instincts needed to race at this level does not make that save. Not after 10 hours in the car, not on tires that are well past their useful life, not on a track that has already put him in difficult situations before. The save was real, and it showed something real about where his development currently stands. It does not prove he belongs at the top level of NASCAR competition. It does not erase the mistakes that came before it. But it does shift the conversation from a place of "he clearly does not belong here" to a place of "okay, let's see what he actually does with this." And that is what makes the next chapter of this story so genuinely interesting. Because what comes after that test session is not another test. It is his official Xfinity Series debut, scheduled for April 4th at Rockingham Speedway. The same track where the critics first started piling on. The same track where this one moment of progress happened. Now it all comes together in a real race, against real Xfinity Series competition, with no safety net of a test environment and no benefit of the doubt that comes with just being out there turning laps. This is where it counts for real. In NASCAR, potential gets you attention, but consistency earns you respect. That is one of the most straightforward truths about how this sport works. A good moment in testing, even a genuinely impressive one, only means something if it can be backed up when the pressure is real and the results are on the scoreboard. If Cleetus goes to Rockingham on April 4th and keeps the car clean, runs competitive laps, makes smart decisions, and stays out of trouble, then people will start taking this story seriously in a way they have not been willing to before. If it goes the other way, then this moment at the test will be remembered as a flash of potential that did not translate when it mattered. There is no middle ground on that. From a fan perspective, this is honestly one of the more compelling individual storylines in NASCAR right now, precisely because of how uncertain it is. Nobody knows which way it goes. The critics have legitimate reasons to remain skeptical. The people who see real progress in that save have something concrete to point to for the first time, and the result on April 4th is going to tell us a lot about which read on this situation is closer to the truth. That uncertainty, that genuine not knowing how it turns out, is exactly what makes racing worth watching in the first place. The honest take on all of this is pretty straightforward. What Cleetus McFarland did at Rockingham during that test session does not suddenly prove he is a ready-made NASCAR competitor. One save after 10 hours of testing is not a resume. It does not answer all of the questions that were raised by experienced drivers who watched him struggle earlier in this journey. The experience gap is still real. The developmental time that most drivers put in before reaching this level is still something he does not have. Those are genuine concerns, and they do not disappear because of one good moment. But here is what that moment does do. It provides the first real piece of evidence, not hope, not potential, not narrative, but actual observable evidence that the instincts are developing, that the hours in the car are producing something, that there is genuine growth happening underneath all of the noise that has surrounded this story. And for a situation where the entire conversation had been stuck in the same place for months, that is genuinely new information. It changes the question being asked, not from "he cannot do this" to "he can definitely do this," but from "he does not belong here" to "let us see if he can back this up." That is where things stand right now. Everything points to April 4th at Rockingham. One race, one chance to turn a moment in testing into the beginning of something that the garage and the fans and the veterans who spoke up have to take seriously. Whether he rises to that moment or whether the skeptics are proven right, We are about to find out. And as a NASCAR fan, this is exactly the kind of storyline that reminds you why you follow this sport every single week. Because sometimes the most interesting thing is not who wins the race, but whether a driver can prove that their moment was real. So, what do you think? Was that save at Rockingham enough to show real progress, or do you think it's still too early to believe in this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because there are real opinions on both sides of this, and the conversation is worth having. If you enjoyed this kind of honest, straightforward NASCAR talk with no sugarcoating and no fake hype, go ahead and like the video and subscribe to NASCAR Nation Report. The channel is brand new, and every subscriber helps build something real here. The goal is 10,000, and having genuine NASCAR fans in this community is what makes it worth doing. All eyes on April 4th. We are about to find out if this story changes or stays exactly the same.